Sawyer Homestead. My name is Chris Cullen. I'm the president of the organization, and we're very, very pleased that you came this evening. Tonight we're going to have Jeffery Albergo talk about Robert S. Duncanson, who was an artist from Monroe, lived here for a number of years, started out as a house painter and went on from there to be landscape painter, has works of art in the DIA and the Smithsonian and all kinds of places. So I will let Jeff take it away.
Hi, Jeff Albergo, and I'm the president of the Robert Duncanson Society. And I'm a photographer, a printer, and a graphic artist. It's about 6 years ago, a friend of mine asked me to do a PowerPoint for a presentation they were doing over at the museum about Duncanson. And after I looked at it, I said, wow, who is this guy and why don't we know about him? In Monroe, history lives on every corner. And this man's life was so amazing that, every time I pick something up that's got his name on it, it leads me down another path of things that he has done. But he started, it would have been, his great-grandfather was a white slave owner down in Fredericksburg, Virginia. He was a colonel in the Revolutionary Army. And his grandfather, Charles, was born in 1745. And Robert Duncanson's, he was born in 1821. But his grandfather was allowed freedom around 1790. They said it was like the first great emancipation in the U.S. And what that consisted of was people that fought in the war were given their freedom. And his grandfather, his father, and his mother, his father John and his mother Lucy, were also given their freedom. But they had to pay for their freedom, and they paid their freedom off in 1810, I believe it was. But they all moved to Fayette, New York, and there was a whole group of them. There was about 90 people that went from Fredericksburg to Fayette, New York. And he had 4 brothers and 2 sisters. And when his grandfather died in 1828, they relocated here to Monroe. Okay, we're going to have to do this the old-fashioned way. So they moved here to Monroe, and they bought property at 8th and Harrison. And they brought 2 lots, and that made them the first settling family of African Americans in the city of Monroe. And that picture there is Monroe from 1880, I believe it was. In 1839, he started his own business. His father was a house painter here in Monroe, and Monroe was declared a booming city at the time. And it was, we were just rebuilding because the whole town was burned down in 1813. So it wasn't long. I mean, it was only 15 years later that they, and he had a great job, he's a house painter, and that allowed him to send a couple of his kids over to Canada to get an education, because they weren't allowed to get an education here in the States. And we're not sure how long he stayed there, but the books do say that he started mixing paints for his father when he was 14 years old. So that's probably about the time he came back. He started a business here with John Gimblin, and they had a relationship probably for the rest of his life, because he pops up in and out through his career. They were house painters, and they were window glazers. And that lasted through to 1839 when he moved to Cincinnati.
Something happened there.
Okay, I got it. Okay, now he moves down to Cincinnati. Now this is called Cincinnati as seen from Covington, Kentucky. And that was one of his first big ones. And this is the gentleman he moved in with. His name was Reuben Graham. And he is said to have been one of a friend of Robert's father. And he moved in with him and married his daughter. His daughter's name was Rebecca, and they had 2 children. And she died in like 1850. And there's no telling anything about her kids, the kids, or her, if they traveled with them, if they stayed there with her father, or what their living situation was, you know. And they really aren't spoke of in the whole history that I've found. The kids haven't. And then he started doing some paintings. He did portrait paintings, and he did what's called fancy paintings, which is them roses there. That was called fancy paintings. And then he did this one. This was his first landscape that he did, and it was Mount Healthy, Ohio. It was also known Mount Pleasant, Ohio, and then they changed the name of it one way or the other. But that was commissioned by the landowner, but he was also one of the founding members of the city. And he would help Duncanson stay afloat by commissioning him to do portraits and to do that. And this house here actually became one of the first stops for the Underground Railroad to help freedom seekers get on down the road. It was really nice. And then in 1844, Duncanson met up with this guy named Coates. And the guy is so mysterious, nobody knows his first name. And they say he was a photographer. I think he was a chemist, because what they did was he painted these pictures, and it was called chemical painting. And the paintings were about 8 foot tall and about 15 or 20 feet wide. And they would put them out on a dark stage and turn some house lights on. And then the picture would slowly develop like a Polaroid picture does today. And that was in 1844. And him and Coates did that for about a year. And then they sold the show to a guy named Winters. Like it says there, a painting from the Mr. Winters show. The whole show was identical. Even the advertisements for it was the same advertisement. They did it all at the same place. And so that could be a Duncanson painting right there. After he did that for a little while, he tended to travel a lot. He moved back here to Detroit. That's Woodward Avenue in 1840, and it was drawn by a guy named Farmer, who did a lot of drawings of the buildings and stuff in Detroit at that time. And he did a few of these paintings while he was there. And these are all at the DIA right now. And that was some of his early portrait work, and then his historic work, they call it. The Drunkard's Plead was a historic painting, as they called them. And then this guy here is Julius Salone, and he was an apprentice of Duncanson's, and he had a studio next door to Duncanson's, and they buddied up quite a bit. And Duncanson kept communications with this guy for a long time. And in his paintings, you can see Duncanson's work because they worked together very well and traveled quite a bit. And then we go to this one. This is one of my favorites. This is the Goliath. The Goliath was a steamboat that brought copper from the copper mines up in the Keweenaw Peninsula, up in the Upper Peninsula. And this was one of the first shipment of copper to Detroit from up there. And this guy here, his name is Charles Avery. He was the owner of that ship, and he owned the Boston, Philadelphia mining company. And he was an abolitionist, and he built colleges. He built the Avery College in Pennsylvania. He built several schools for African American kids back in the 1840s, 1850s. And he commissioned Duncanson, come on, to paint that. That is the copper mines up off of Lake Superior. And that was one of Duncanson's truly best landscapes, they say. They say it is, you can go up there and see it, and it still looks identical to this picture. They said it was one of the best ever painted of that, the cliff mines. But the boat behind them, the Goliath, on its way back to the copper mines, it was full of supplies for the mine. And it got as far as Port Huron when it caught fire and exploded. It was carrying 200 kegs of blasting powder. The cook got off. The cook saw the fire start and jumped. But they said you could feel the percussions for miles. And they said you could hear it for hundreds of miles away, man. And it was just a good thing Duncanson wasn't on that one. I mean, and the people he met and the things that he does, almost everything has a 2-hour backstory of its own. I mean, like the innocent little cargo ship, you know. And that was painted in 1848. That was up in the UP. This is summertime or summer, and this is winter. And they're pretty sure that them were taken and painted of Stallone's family's farm up in the UP. And he had all 4 seasons, and they were auctioned off at or raffled off at an art show. And these are the only 2 that people can know of. The other 2 have kind of disappeared off the map. And they're in a private collection. And then again, here we learned that this was out of Detroit Free Press in 1849. We have learned that Mr. Duncanson has engaged to paint a marine scene for the Mr. Ward's new steamer Ocean. Of course, it will be a beautiful piece and highly creditable to the artist. The Mr. Wards owned passenger ships and cargo ships that went down the Great Lakes from Detroit out to New York and, you know, the coastline there. And about the late 1800s, they bought their competitor, and their competitor had they did shipping from New York down to Cuba. And in 1880, this boat was shot down and sunk by the Spanish Army during the and the United States Navy actually commandeered all the rest of their 27 ships to use during the Spanish-American War. So, I mean, everywhere the guy went. And then here's a sketch that he did. It's called The Great Behemoth. And it's one of the only sketches that's out there that people can actually see. What he would do is, in the winter, he would sit at his studio and paint. And in the summertime, he would go out and do sketches similar to this. And then he would turn them into that beautiful work that we see.
What is that?
It's a biblical type setting, and you can see the heaven up there in the clouds. And you can see, so there's a couple of angels, I think, down here. Yeah, right here. And this was up in Lake Superior, Carp Lake. And this was the Garden of Eden. And he painted this in Detroit, I believe. And in 1851, he toured Boston with it. He took it out to Boston and stuff like that. And he ran into Charles Avery in Boston and presented him with this painting as a token of gratitude for all he has done for the African American people. And that immediately got the attention of some of the biggest abolitionists in the country. Like they had a nice story about this painting in Frederick Douglass's newspaper, which was called Frederick Douglass's newspaper. And it later on became the Independence, I think, or the Liberty. And after that, he started getting calls from all kinds of abolitionists that wanted their portraits painted by him. And most of the funds were contributed back into the abolition cause. He did a couple of paintings here for a family in Monroe named Murphy. There was Seba Murphy, who was captured in the War of 1812 in New York. And he came back to Monroe, and he became a state senator. He worked here at the deeds department, and his son, William, were both, he was a state senator, and he became a consul to Germany under Lincoln. And he went over there selling war bonds for the Union Army to all the rich German abolitionists over there. And it got him thrown out of the country after Lincoln died. They sent him back, and they got a portrait of the family over at the museum. His great-great-great-granddaughter called me from Denmark a while back, wondering if there was where that picture was. And I went over, I found it at the museum, they had it. And he had painted like 4 people in that family, the son-in-law and 2 of the daughters he had done portraits of. And the son-in-law's name was Campbell, and he was big into lumber. And I guess he had a big place up in Alpena that was a lumber mill, and he came back down here, and he was out in Hillsdale and bought a printing press and was one of the first newspapers down here in this area. And something else that's bypassed in our history, and this was called the Belmont, and it is in Cincinnati. He didn't paint this one, but that's what it looked like in 1857 when he got there, or close to there. He was there in 1850 and 52 and 53. It was owned by Nicholas Longsworth. Nicholas Longsworth was a real estate investor, and he owned a vineyard, and he was a winemaker. And at that time, he was thought to be the richest man in the United States. And he hired Duncanson to come and paint his hallway. Duncanson painted 8 murals that were 6.5 feet wide by 9 feet tall. And then he did some adornment work up over 6 of the doorways. And when Longsworth died in 1863, his son took over the house. And they wallpapered over the paintings. The paintings were painted directly on the plaster. And after they were done with it, they sold it to the Taft family. It would been President Taft's brother bought the house. And him and his wife, who would been Alice Roosevelt, who would be Teddy Roosevelt's oldest daughter, bought the house. And they found out about it and had the wallpaper taken down. And a lot of people say that the paste in that actually preserved the paintings for years. And then they donated it to the city of Cincinnati as a museum. Pretty, and it's beautiful. If you go there, you can stand there for hours and just look at these paintings. My wife and myself, we went down there for our anniversary. We had a great time, but we spent hours just standing there looking at these because the detail in his pictures are so fantastic. I mean, it's in Cincinnati. Yeah, it's called the Taft Museum.
It's on the east side of downtown.
Yep, 4th Street, I believe.
Easy to get to.
Yeah, it is. And then here in 1850, 51 and 52, he was there at the Belmont. And in the summertime, he went on a road trip. Well, on this road trip, which was 1850 and 51, he went with a guy named A.O. Moore. And he was a painter, a botanist, and a abolitionist. And they went into the deep south there. This 1850, he went to Kentucky, he went to Virginia, and down into Tennessee, which is not a good place for a man of color. The newspaper, the Asheville newspaper that said where all the places that he went, mentioned that they had been down there for almost 2 fortnights without incident. And there's a museum, an art gallery in Fayette, in Fredericksburg, Virginia, named Myers Fine Arts Art Gallery. And Michael Myers had in his possession at one time about 40 of these paintings. And they were all the paintings that were painted in this area. And he's got a really nice book about Duncanson's courageous tour of the Deep South. And it's a really beautiful book. And he's supposed to have another book coming out soon. Not that one. I think he was a baseball player, I'm not sure. But here's a story about them being down there and where some of the pictures were painted at. And there's Asheville. That's the Smoky Mountains in 1851.
That wasn't Asheville, North Carolina.
No.
No, I didn't think so.
I'm not I'd have to look. Yeah, they were down there in North Carolina and stuff like that. And here's Virginia. French board in Virginia. Yeah, he was risking life and limb going down there. And he came back here, and this was 1852. This is the Fireman's Hall downtown Detroit. And he was there setting up an art show. It was Fireman's Hall. They had an opera house in there, and the third floor, I think, was where they had the art shows. And this was the first art show in the state of Michigan. And he would have been the first black artist to display his work in the state of Michigan. And that was 1852. And while he was there, he ran into a buddy. His name was Conover. And he was a lawyer and an abolitionist in Cincinnati, and he moved here to Detroit, and he became the editor of 2 of the Detroit newspapers at the time. And this book had just come out, which is Uncle Tom's Cabin by Harriet Beecher Stowe, who Duncanson knew from Cincinnati, from some soirees, weekend events he went to at a place owned by a guy named Richard Rust, who was a huge abolitionist also. And he built the Rust College down in Kentucky, I believe it is, but it was one of the first historic black colleges in the country. And he was a preacher. He got thrown out of high school for his abolitionist behaviors and his anti-slavery point of view. So he went to a Catholic or a Christian school and become a minister, and then bought a college and bought all kinds of stuff, got real rich and stuff. And then he hired Duncanson to do the painting there. And that's at the DIA. And then after that, around 53, he goes to Italy. He goes to Europe. And as part of payment from Longsworth, he would send you on what was called the Great Tour of Europe. And all the artists would do it. All the artists with money would do it. And even people like Fabergé, the egg guy, he sent his son on this tour. And it was the same basic tour, except he would stop at jewelers and check their stuff out. But they spent a couple of months in London going to the museums, talking to the artists there. And then they went to Paris and didn't like it very much. Spent a couple weeks there, and then went to Italy. Went to Venice, and then they went to Florence. And in Florence, they had a guy there. Well, he toured with a guy named William Songton, and he was a painter, the same type of painting that Duncanson did, which was the Hudson River School of Painting. And they buddied up for that tour. Oh, where are we at here? And they meet this guy, Power. And Power was a sculptor. And he worked for Longsworth in like 1839. And Longsworth sent him on this tour. And he made it to Florence and said, wow, what beautiful sculpting there is here. I'm staying. And he didn't come back. And so he was kind of stationed in Florence, and he housed all the artists that came from the U.S., and they had a big party. And there was a place to hang out, which didn't go well with Duncanson. And he left. He left. I don't think he was in Europe more than 6 months. He was planning on being there for a couple of years. And it says, I will let you know why I returned so soon. I was disgusted with the artists in Europe. They are mean copyists, producing pictures, hardly maliciously, all I wanted to see, and I have seen, someday I will return and refresh my, write me another of your glowing letters. God bless. And that was sent to his buddy Salone. So he wasn't impressed with, with the work they did. And then when they got back, Song Tong stayed in New York, which made him even madder. So he went back to Cincinnati by himself. And in Cincinnati, he runs into James Ball. And this is the Ball daguerreotype, the Great Ball daguerreotype Gallery. And it was on 4th Street in Cincinnati. And the lower pictures are, these are daguerreotypes, which were photographs at that time. And these larger ones up on the top were Duncanson's paintings. And what Duncanson did mostly was he did colorizing. And it was, that's him there. And one thing I found about these photographers, there's no pictures of them. There's only 4 known pictures of Duncanson, and there's only like 2 known pictures of Ball. And a lot of the other photographers he hung out with only had 1 or 2 pictures of themselves. And this is
It's like a mother's never in the picture, she's always taking the picture.
right, and this is one of his colorizations, and it's a daguerreotype, and they would go as far as they would put gold leaf jewelry on them. If they had like a bracelet on, they would actually gold leaf it, and then paint the pictures. That would have costed about $100, and that would probably cost you another 20 or 30 to have it colorized. So that was a decent amount of change back then. And in Cincinnati became like the capital of photography. Photography started in like 1839 in France, a guy named Daguerre. And after he developed the technique, he opened it up to the public, and he didn't hold patents on it. He just let it go where it went. And at the same time, a guy named Talbot was over in the UK, except what he did was he charged a patent. So his work didn't sell quite well. But by the 1840s, America was the home of the photography. We had the best photographers, and we had the most. And in Cincinnati, by the 1850s, in Cincinnati, there was like 40 photo studios in Cincinnati, and everybody was into photography, and a lot of the chemists were into photography, and Duncanson was into photography all his career. And then what they did here was they created this mammoth tour, a pictorial tour. It was called a panorama. And what that was a length of canvas that would stretch across the stage. And they would wind it up on one end and unwind it on the other end. And this one was views of the African slave trade from the northern cities and that, cotton and sugar, through all the way from the time they were picked up in Africa all the way to the time they made it to Canada and freedom. And their panorama was like 8 feet tall and 1,800 feet long. And it took 2 hours to show this. And they would charge about $25 to view it. And they had stage lighting, they had narrator. This booklet is a program of the whole thing, and it was broke down, and it had a caption for each one of the pictures as it went by. They had sound effects, they had an orchestra that backed it up. There's a copy of this in the other room. It's the only thing that survived of this panorama, too. It disappeared sometime in the late 1850s. he was going to take it over to Europe, but they don't think it ever made it to Europe. And another one of these things is that nobody's got any pictures of it. There's no pictures of any of these panoramas. And when I was researching this and going through these newspapers about panoramas, I found this one panorama that was put out by a bank. And it was circulated to the banks to show people how to pick out a fake $5 note. So these panoramas was basically like a movie that they sent around and stuff. I mean, and I saw it in a bunch of different cities. I'm like, wow, that's cool. And then he's in Cincinnati. This guy shows up. This guy's name is Robert Harlan. And his father was a slave owner in Kentucky. He was a politician, and he is biracial, but his father gave him freedom to do whatever he wanted. He was basically a free man. And he went out to California and made a lot of money on racehorses and the gold fields. And around 1855 or so, he come back to Cincinnati and found out everybody was doing well with this photography stuff. So he bought into Ball's studio and then kind of forced him out. And Duncanson stayed there with him. And you can see in some of these, like they got pretty nasty about the breakup. I'll tell you what, they were talking about money being stolen. And right in the newspapers they were saying that stuff. But in these articles it says that Duncanson is working for him. You know, everybody loved the guy, and it says that Duncanson was in his studio, and he was the primary artist in his studio. And this was one of the paintings he did while he was in the studio, which was the Western Forest, which was one of his masterpieces. And then his other masterpiece there is the Land of the Lotus Eater. And that was bought by the King of Sweden. And it's based on a poem by Alfred Tennyson, which he wrote the poem based on a story from Homer's Odyssey, which is a Greek mythology kind of deal. And he toured with that quite a bit. Also, while he was there, while he was hanging out here with Harlan, was another photographer that come in after Ball left. And his name was Charles Waldeck. And he painted some, the bridge that goes across the river into Kentucky. I'm not sure what the name of it was, but the Ohio River. And Duncanson did the colorizing on it. But in 1866, Waldeck went and took photographs in the Mammoth Caves. And he was the first photographer to ever take pictures underground. And he did it for 3 months in 1866. And he took 42 pictures, I believe it was. Because it was so hard to do, they had to use magnesium that they would roll up into a wick and light it. And then they only had a certain amount of time to shoot the picture before the cavern would fill with smoke from the magnesium. But there is talk that Duncanson may have been there in the cavern. And there is a gentleman in the photograph that bears a striking resemblance. But a lot of this stuff, nobody wrote it down. Even we're the first people to ever do this. And the closest we can come is he shot it for 3 months in 1866. That's the closest we can come for it, you know? I mean, So matching the time that they took it and matching where Duncanson was at the time is where we're at here. And then we're getting in close to the Civil War, and it was about 1860. Everybody's kind of hiding out because at that time they were getting ready for the Civil War. The African Americans were being picked up off the street. There were rewards for them if they were actually slaves or not, and there was a lot of violence. So he decided he was going to take a tour, and he went up here to Minnesota, and that is my friend lived up there in Minnesota. He said that falls still looks like that. He knew immediately what it was. And this was up in Montreal, Owlhead Mountain. And this was in Montreal, St. Anne's River, which was beautiful painting. This one was in New Hampshire. This one comes back to Vermont. That's a real nice bridge. I can't find a really good print, or I would have printed it. And then we go to Montreal. He went back to Cincinnati, rounded up all this stuff, and said, I'm leaving. And by 1863, 1864, and 1865, he spent his time up in Montreal. And of course, he runs into a photographer. His name is William Notman. William Notman moved to Montreal from Ireland in 1850 and started a photography studio. And he took photographs of the Victoria Bridge in Montreal from start to finish. And he packaged it all up, made some nice prints, put it in a nice wooden box, and sent it to the Queen. And the Queen was so impressed that she made him the photographer of the Queen. And everybody, all the royalties that went to Canada had to stop and get their pictures taken at this guy's place. He was amazing. The McCord Museum in Montreal just purchased 450,000 pictures of his. And they've got like 77,000 of them online right now. And only 8 of them are Duncansons. Yeah. And that's his studio there. And Duncanson held art classes down in the basement when he wasn't working. But that studio, he had 60 people working for him at the time. He had photographers, he had chemists, he had secretaries, he had people that worked in the fitting rooms, and on and on and on. And by the time, like 1890, he was actually had studios set up at Harvard and Yale where he was taking class pictures. He was the first photographer to figure out he could make money selling class pictures. And this is one of the photographs of one of Duncanson's paintings. And the painting is, no one knows where the painting is, but we do have the photograph that's at the McCord, or at least the digital copy. That's St. Anne's River. That's another one of Duncanson's. And this is the land of the lotus eater. They took that picture and sent it to Europe. Because Duncanson wanted to do another European tour, and he took a bunch of his paintings, I guess about 20 of them, and went to tour Europe. And it was easier for him to get out of the country by going through Montreal, because if he would have left the United States, for one, the blacks weren't allowed to leave the country, and if he did, he would have needed a diplomatic passport. So up in Montreal, he just jumped on a boat and left, you know. And this was in Glasgow, in Scotland, or Ireland. And he brought these two. Now that's the Land of the Lotus Eaters, and there's 2 copies of them, because this was his masterpiece. So he brought 2 copies of them with him, and they're both known. That's Alfred Tennyson. Now he saw the picture of his poem and was so impressed, he invited Duncanson to his house for lunch. And this tour was just, this meeting was so publicized. I know of it as being in like 10 different newspapers. It was in the Wales newspaper, it was in the London newspaper, it was in the Detroit Free Press, it was in Napa Valley, California newspaper, it was in the Wisconsin newspaper, it was in Galveston, Texas newspaper, and they didn't think too highly of Duncanson in Galveston, not a bit. So he didn't get a good review there. And then while he's over there, he meets this lady. Well, he's known this lady for a while. Her name's Charlotte Cushman. And Charlotte Cushman was known to be one of the greatest actresses of that time. And she did mostly, you know, East Coast stuff, toured the US all the time, and she also toured Europe playing Romeo. That was her biggest role. And she knew the royalty over in England, she knew the royalty over in Italy, and she was a frequent visitor with these people. And she bought Duncanson's paintings starting in about 1850. And after she met Duncanson and bought some of his paintings, she would only buy paintings or artwork from African Americans that had a connection with the abolition network. And she would send them over to her friend, the Duchess of Sutherland. Now, the Duchess, Anne, she was the mistress of Coates. And the mistress of Coates was the chief of staff to the Queen. And she did mistress of Coates. She made sure the Queen got dressed. She made sure the Queen had her breakfast. If you had dealings with the Queen, you had to go through her first. And so, so he knew her too. I mean, and
How old would that lady have been?
which one?
She looked so young, the Duchess.
The Duchess, she was in her, probably her 30s.
Wow, she was still at 17.
Well, she had that role for quite a few years. And she got this painting, which is the Western Forest. And that was a gift from Charlotte Cushman. And this guy here, he's the King of Sweden and the King of Norway. And he bought the Land of the Lotus Eater. He bought the one on the bottom that's the yellowish, goldish color. And that's in the Royal Archives over in Stockholm. It's on display there.
I thought Duncanson got married and had a family.
He got married in 1840s and had a wife. She had 2 children,
Yeah.
and she died in 1850. And there's not much saying what happened after that. But he did get remarried. But there's not a whole lot said about that either.
Where was his family while he's traveling?
We don't know.
Really?
We don't know. It's not written in any book that I've seen. And none of the people that I've talked to have any information about it. But his family does. There are descendants here in Monroe.
Yeah.
But they don't.
And they aren't necessarily direct descendants from him.
No.
There's, in Toledo, there's a family, and they're not direct descendants from Robert, but they are Duncanson descendants.
Right. But there's no talk about what happened to his family.
One of them went out to Seattle. One of his sons went out to Seattle.
One of his sons is Seattle.
One was killed in a train.
That was his brother.
That's his brother.
And then he comes back to Cincinnati. He starts to feel a sickness coming on, and he decided it's time to go back home. So he came back to Cincinnati, and what he started doing was digging through his old sketchbooks, because he kind of like quit touring because of his illnesses. Now this painting here originally was only 7 inches by 12 inches wide.
Wow.
Yeah, it was one of his smallest ones. And then this is some of his Scottish paintings. These are Scottish paintings from his early trip, which would have been like 1850s. And that was Italy. Another Italian picture. And then he comes back here to Monroe because his brother.
This doesn't look as fascinating as all those other landscaping.
He came back to Monroe because his brother had passed away, and he came home for the funeral. His brother worked in a train yard in Chicago and was crushed between 2 trains. And they did bring his body back here to Monroe for a burial. He's over at the historic Woodland Cemetery. And he's got quite a bit of family over there.
What was the name?
John Duncanson, yeah. And while he was here, he did this painting. It was called the Paradise in the Paris. And this would be the Paris right here, which is an angel that was locked out of heaven. And that goes back to an old poem also. And this painting was on loan to after he died, it went to the DIA, and the DIA loaned it to the city of Detroit, and it was hanging in the chief of police office, and someone broke in and vandalized it and slashed it. And it got like this 2-line thing in the free press. Some vandals slashed the Duncanson, you know, and that's all it said about it. But they had it repaired, and that is in private ownership here in Detroit. And then we got this one here, Ellen's Isle. This is at the DIA also. And this is on his grave marker, his headstone, over at the historic Woodland Cemetery. He was offered like $18,000 for these paintings, and that was their money back then. And he turned them down. I think I got the newspaper article. Here's the newspaper article. He said he got $8,000 for the Paris and $15,000 for the Ellen's Isle from the Archbishop of Cincinnati, and he turned it down. What he did was the Ellen's Isle he gave to Senator Sumner, and as a token of gratitude for what he had done for the freedom movement, because Sumner was on the floor of the Senate in 1860 giving an anti-slavery abolitionist speech when the representative from North Carolina came down and beat him with a cane and nearly killed him. And it's known in history as the caning of Sumner. And that was hung in his office in Washington, and then it hung at his house. And when he passed away, they sent it back to the Duncanson family here in Monroe, and now it's over at the Detroit Institute of Arts. And it's a beautiful painting. It's and it's over in Scotland, and he actually painted it from a poem, which he did quite a bit. But he said that he was sitting on the same rock that the writer sat on when he wrote the poem. He was sitting on when he painted that. Yeah.
And did you say he's buried over here? In Woodland?
Yeah, Woodland Cemetery.
Really?
Yep.
Robert too?
Yeah, Robert Duncanson is painted in Woodland Cemetery. That's why we're bringing this up.
Oh, wow.
And this is one of his last paintings, and it's a storm on the Scottish coast. And by this time, dementia set in pretty heavily. He was setting up a show down in Detroit when he had a breakdown, and they put him in an asylum. And that would have been, it was called Michigan Retreat. And a lot of people think this was a state of mind because he was going through dementia. Because and they attribute it to lead poisoning. Because everything he touched contained lead. And he started mixing house paints for his father when he was 14. And lead was used as a pigment. It was used to make the paint opaque, and it was also used to dry the paint faster. So he did that, and then he got into window glazing, and they used white lead to glaze windows at the time. And then he gets into photography, and daguerreotypes were silver-coated copper sheets. Well, you got to liquefy the silver to get it on the copper, so he was breathing in silver vapors. And then you would take the plate and put it in your camera, and to develop it and stop it, you used mercury vapors. And like one of the only recipes I can find that actually they wrote down said that you gotta heat it to 168 degrees Fahrenheit. That's the only recipe I've found for any of these concoctions that are, you know, I mean, I was like, wow, glad someone saved that, huh? But you can see the turmoil that he's going through. At this time, he was quite convinced he was possessed by Michelangelo. And in all the paintings that you see at Duncanson, everything is so calm and serene. There's nothing that's harmful or anything, you know, and except this picture. And that's how he ended his life. I mean, that would be, looks pretty treacherous.
Was that really dementia or just all the chemicals he was exposed to?
Well, whatever, it caused him to go crazy. Insanity of, you know, dementia, insanity. He was 50 years old. Yeah. So and you got to remember, he did all of this in 30 years. He started this in 1840 and finished it in like 1871. So 31 years, he did all of this. He's been credited for over 200 paintings. And them are all well documented. They're documented by historians. It's documented in Smithsonian. The Smithsonian has an inventory of American paintings that covers all kinds of paintings. I think they said they had over 300,000 paintings listed. And they got Duncanson for 150 or 190, you know, and so he did a lot of work in them couple of years. And this is his grave marker. It's on either side there. It's on two sides. And it was donated by the Detroit Fine Arts Breakfast Club, who works out of the DIA, I believe. And they rounded up the money to put this together. Once you go in, go up the hill, it's on the left-hand side. First hill. And this is what Duncanson would look like when we get the statue built. And we are shooting to have a statue. And we have a statue committee that's apprised of myself, Patrick Barley, Nancy Williams. Nancy is instrumental on getting everything in the square put in the square. Bill Saul, who also is a big part of putting everything in the square there. We have William Parker, who is the president of the NAACP, that's helping with it. Kelly Vining, who is a city council member. And so we are really, really good at about getting this done. And it'll be a beautiful statue. And
Is that what the statue's gonna be like?
yeah, that's what it's, yeah, that's what's, we're hoping. I mean, first we gotta get the money. I mean, and then we'll get the sculptor and we'll find out if it's feasible, and then we'll go from there.
Is there a place to put donations for that?
Yeah, either me or Nancy will take them. Yeah, and because we're gonna get some big corporate donations, I'm sure. We already got a corporate donation for like almost $4,000. So it'll be a project, that's for sure. And that is all I got. I'm sorry about the inconvenience, but